After 3 weeks of living in silence, my hearing suddenly returned. But before I could tell anyone, I overheard what my daughter-in-law was saying about me and about my son. That old woman doesn't know anything, and he can't even last 2 minutes. I pretended I heard nothing. I just kept smiling. I let her think I was just a harmless, deaf old woman. But on her birthday, I just need one recording to make her whole world come crashing down. But before we continue, check if you are subscribed to Elderly Stories and share in the comments where you're watching from. We would love to know how far our revenge stories travel. I woke up earlier than usual. When the morning light hadn't yet filtered through the bedroom curtain, something was different. A vague but sharp sensation made my heart beat a little faster. I stayed still, listening. Then I heard a soft, crystal-clear sound, like a dewdrop falling onto a lake. A lark was singing cheerfully in the branches of the dogwood tree outside my window. That song, small but sharp, seemed to be calling my name, pulling me out of the silent darkness. I shot up in bed, so fast the bed creaked. My trembling hand went to my ear. Not believing what I had just discovered, I heard the rustle of the sheets under my palm, the rhythm of my own breathing, steady but a little shaky. My hearing was back. I left the room, my bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Every step brought a wonderful sound. The wood creaked softly under my weight. The curtains brushed against me as I passed. I went down to the living room. Valerie, my daughter-in-law, was there, holding a steaming pot of chamomile tea. The steam rose thickly, filling the room with a warm, sweet scent. She didn't see me come in. Valerie smiled. She gestured with her hand, her long fingers moving gently. Asking me if I wanted a cup of tea, I nodded, pulled my favorite armchair up to the table, and sat down. The chair made a small noise, and I found myself smiling as I heard that sound again. I decided not to tell Valerie yet that I had my hearing back. I wanted to keep this secret, just for a moment, to enjoy the magic of this new feeling. Valerie placed a cup of tea in front of me. The warmth brushed my hand, and a slight shiver ran through my body. Then she took out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. A video call connected. On the other side was Sarah, Valerie's best friend, who I had only seen a few times at family gatherings. Valerie's voice sounded sweet, as always, asking about work, about the kids. Then Valerie glanced at me sideways, as if checking on me, believing I still couldn't hear. She lowered her voice and started to whisper, but to me, every word was now as clear as a church bell. "That old woman doesn't know anything," she said with annoyance. "Having to take care of her every day is exhausting." I felt a knot in my chest, but I stayed perfectly still, my hands gripping the mug. Valerie continued, her tone loaded with contempt. "Besides, David is so disgustingly cheap. If it weren't for this house and his mom's money, I would have been long gone. And to top it all off, he can't even last 2 minutes." The mug trembled slightly in my fingers, clinking against the saucer. Valerie spun around, startled, her eyes wide, but I just raised my head and pretended to take another sip of tea. My face was serene. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Her words echoed in my mind, sharp as pieces of broken glass. Valerie, the daughter-in-law I had loved like my own, thought that about me. And David, my son, whom I had loved and protected his entire life, was despised by her just for being frugal. Valerie quickly said to Sarah, "Well, I have to go make breakfast for my dear mother-in-law. Talk later." She hung up the phone, and her smile reappeared, as if those poisonous words had never left her mouth. She turned to me and gestured, asking if I wanted something to eat. I shook my head, faked a couple of coughs, and pointed towards the bedroom, signaling that I felt a little tired and wanted to rest. She nodded, her expression immediately turning to concern. She even came over and gently took my arm to help me up, as if I were a frail old woman who needed constant care. I let her guide me to the stairs, Every step was an effort to stay calm. When I got to my room, I shut the door hard and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt clicking startled me, as if I was waking up from a nightmare. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. I picked up my phone, but my fingers were trembling so much I almost dropped it. I looked for David's number in my contacts, my fingers sliding on the screen. When I pressed the call button, the hold music started to play. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the piece my late husband, Thomas, loved the most. That sound was like a hammer blow to my memory, taking me back to those happy days with him, when we would dance to that melody in the living room, and David, just a little boy, would run laughing around us. My name is Martha Anderson. I'm 68 years old, and I live alone in a house in a quiet town in Ohio. This house is my entire world. It holds every trace of Thomas and the years I spent raising David on my own. Thomas left us too soon, a victim of a cruel cancer, leaving me this house, some land on the outskirts of town, and the savings he had worked so hard to gather his whole life. I never considered it a fortune, but a legacy of the soul, a reminder of my husband's love and sacrifice. Raising David alone was anything but easy. There were nights I stayed awake, sitting by his bed while he had a fever, holding his hand and praying he would get better. There were days under the hot sun in the backyard when I patiently helped him learn to ride his bike. He would fall over and over, scraping his knees, but he kept laughing, his eyes shining with joy. "Mom, I did it!" he shouted the first time he pedaled without falling. I hugged him tightly, tears of pure happiness streaming down my cheeks. David was all I had, the only light in my lonely years after Thomas was gone. The day David brought Valerie home to meet me, I felt a new ray of hope. She walked in holding a potted orchid in full bloom, her smile as radiant as the spring sun. "Your house is beautiful. It looks like something out of a painting," she said, her eyes sparkling as she looked around the living room. Valerie stopped in front of the old photos of Thomas and asked me about each one. "Is this your wedding photo? Your husband looks so elegant." She spoke with a genuine curiosity that made me smile. I thought she was a wonderful woman and that David was lucky to have found someone so sweet, attentive, and so caring about family. After they got married, David and Valerie moved into a comfortable apartment in the next neighborhood over. I wasn't sad, because I knew David needed space to build his own life. Valerie still visited me often. Every weekend she'd bring something to share, sometimes a pot of hot chicken soup, other times a tray of pastries she had baked herself. "Mom, try this. I made it with my grandmother's recipe," she'd say proudly. As I ate, I'd feel my heart fill with warmth, as if the house had life in it again. One time, she even sat with me for hours to teach me how to use a smartphone. "Mom, now you can video call David whenever you miss him," she said, smiling, showing me step by step on the screen. Thanks to her, I could see David on my phone screen whenever he traveled for work. Valerie had worked as an office clerk, but one day she confessed to me that the job was suffocating her. "I want to do something of my own," to Mom. "Something more creative," she said, her eyes shining as she told me about her dream of opening a clothing boutique. I saw in her that same spark of passion I had seen in David when he started his first job. Valerie turned a spare room in their apartment into a small studio. She hung clothes everywhere, set up bright lights, and every night she would host live streams to sell them. I used to watch her streams, admiring how confidently she spoke, the way she presented each dress with so much enthusiasm. But one time, I accidentally overheard her complaining to David on the phone. Her voice sounded tired and frustrated. "Honey, this laptop is ancient. It processes orders so slowly. I'm exhausted." I felt a pang of sympathy hearing her. Valerie was doing everything she could to build her career, but she didn't have enough resources. David just answered with a soft laugh and his calm voice. "Relax, honey. Let me save up a bit more, and I'll buy you a new one." I knew David was always careful with money, partly because he grew up not having much, and also because he wanted to protect what Thomas and I had left. But hearing Valerie, an idea started to form in my mind. I wanted to give her a special gift for her upcoming birthday, a sum of money to be the seed money for her business. I imagined the joy on her face, having her own fashion boutique, with racks full of clothes and customers coming and going. I wanted her to succeed, not just because she was my daughter-in-law, but because I truly believed she deserved it. I even called our trusted family lawyer, Michael, to ask about the legal process for a transfer. "Mrs. Anderson, this is simple," he said over the phone in his deep voice. "We just need to draft a gift affidavit. I'll handle the paperwork, but are you sure it's a considerable amount?" I smiled, firmly. "I'm sure, Michael. Valerie is my daughter-in-law. I want her to have a good future." And then, that weekend afternoon came that changed my life. I was on the last bus of the day, holding a cloth bag full of fresh bell peppers, kidney beans, and ground beef. I was smiling, thinking about the chili that David loved so much. I wanted to make it for him that day, just to see his smile when he got home. But as I was thinking about adding a little extra chili powder, a sharp screech suddenly tore through the air. The bus tires squealed, as if they were screaming in pain. The vehicle swerved sharply to one side. I still couldn't understand what was happening when I heard the sound of metal crashing, sharp and terrifying, mixed with the shattering of glass. My head hit the window, hard. A stabbing pain exploded like fire. I tried to hold on to the seat, but everything in front of me went blurry, and then completely dark. The sound of the world disappeared. All that was left was a black, icy void. When I woke up, the smell of antiseptic hit my nose and I frowned. I was lying in a completely white bed. The fluorescent light on the ceiling made my eyes burn. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if an invisible stone was crushing me. Then I saw David sitting right next to me, his hand squeezing mine tightly. His eyes were red, like he had been crying. Valerie was behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her face worried but tender. David's lips moved. I saw him say, "Mom, you're awake." But no sound reached my ears. I panicked. I put my hands to my ears, but nothing changed. That silence was more terrifying than any pain. A doctor came in, wearing a white coat. He had a kind smile, but a serious look in his eyes. He said something. I saw his lips move. But no sound reached me. I looked at David, then at Valerie, searching for help with my eyes. Valerie quickly grabbed a notepad and a pen from the table and handed them to the doctor. He wrote a few clear lines, with a firm handwriting, as if trying to reassure me. "The surgery was a success. You suffered a severe concussion. You will temporarily be unable to hear. But don't worry, your hearing should return in a few weeks." After reading it, I felt my heart sink. Losing my hearing, even temporarily, was something I had never imagined. I nodded to the doctor, trying to force a smile so David wouldn't worry. But inside me, there was a storm of uncertainty. During the following days in the hospital, Valerie took care of me with touching dedication. She brought me a bowl of hot chicken soup. The smell reminded me of warm afternoons in the kitchen. "I cooked this for 4 hours, Mom," she wrote in a small notebook. She sat by the bed, gave me each spoonful carefully, blowing on it first to cool it down. One time she even washed my hair in the bed, her hands gently massaging my scalp, and then she neatly braided it. "Mom always has to look pretty," she wrote, adding a drawing of a smiley face. I looked at her and felt immense gratitude. Every time a nurse came in to check on me, Valerie was the one who went out to talk to her. She wrote down all the doctor's instructions in the notebook, from the medication doses to the schedules, and then she would show it to me patiently. "Don't worry, Mom. Mom, I'll take care of everything," she wrote, with a look full of tenderness. I felt lucky. Even though the accident had stolen my hearing, I still had David and Valerie by my side. When I was discharged, I returned to the family home. But everything was different now. There were no more birds singing, No sound of the wind in the trees. Valerie put sticky notes all over the house. Watch the step on the stairs. Take medicine at 8 a.m. on the kitchen table. Close the window when it rains in the living room. She also bought a small whiteboard and put it in the middle of the living room so we could talk. "Write what you want to eat here, Mom," she wrote, with a wink. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I felt a great emptiness. I missed our lively conversations, her loud laugh when she talked about difficult customers on her live streams. Valerie also took pictures of us. In one, she was feeding me with a spoon. In another, I was sitting in the garden reading, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, making my hair shine. She posted those photos on social media, along with loving captions. "Happiness is being able to care for my second mom. I hope she recovers soon." I read the comments from friends and family. Everyone said David was lucky to be married to such a good woman like Valerie. "You're a real gem, dear." One of my old friends wrote, "David is so lucky," a distant relative commented. I looked at those words and felt warmth in my heart. I wrote on the whiteboard, "Thank you, Valerie. Having you is a blessing." She read it and ran to hug me. I felt her shoulders shaking and knew she was crying tears of happiness. 3 weeks after the accident, I woke up early one morning. A very soft, buzzing sound was echoing in my ear, like a small, lost bee looking for a way out. I stayed perfectly still, afraid the sound would disappear. I listened, my heart pounding. The buzzing got clearer, and suddenly I realized it was the engine of a truck passing on the street in front of the house. I sat up slowly, carefully, as if I was afraid of breaking the miracle that had just happened. Then I understood. My hearing was back. I went to the living room, excited to give Valerie a big surprise, but I never imagined I would be the one getting the surprise. Her words were like sharp knives stabbing straight into my heart. "That old woman doesn't know anything. I have to take care of her every day. It's exhausting. And besides, David is so disgustingly cheap. If it weren't for this house and that old woman's money, I would have been long gone." "Hello? Mom?" David's voice on the other end of the line snapped me out of my thoughts. What would happen if I spoke now? David would cause a scene. He would confront Valerie. She would deny everything. She would cry. She would say that after the accident, I wasn't right in the head. I had no proof. Nothing but what I had heard. Valerie would find a way to make me look like a liar. And David, blinded by love, would probably believe her. I would lose my only advantage, the secret. I couldn't let that happen. I hung up immediately, without letting David say another word. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I opened my messages and wrote a short sentence to David. "Pocket dial, everything is fine, son." I hit send, feeling like I had just crossed a line. I sat down at my desk and turned on the laptop. The screen lit up with my familiar banking interface. I looked for the automatic transfer I had set up for Valerie's business fund, that gift I had prepared with so much excitement to help her achieve her dream. My fingers hovered over the cancel button. I didn't hesitate. I pressed it firmly. A message popped up. "Transfer canceled." A cold, firm feeling ran through my entire body. I didn't feel pain anymore, only determination. The game had changed, and now I was making the rules. In the days after getting my hearing back, I lived like a veteran actress on the stage of my own life. I kept playing the role of the pitiful, deaf mother-in-law, depending on the notes Valerie wrote for me. Every morning I pretended to be clumsy, my eyes glazed over an old novel, or sitting silently by the window, as if the world was still a mute place for me. But inside, I was watching, listening, and remembering every single detail. One morning, I sat in the garden, where Thomas's roses were still blooming. I had an old book in my hands, my eyes half closed as if I were falling asleep, but through a tiny slit, I watched Valerie's every move. She came out with a watering can in her hand, her face cheerful as usual. but when she thought no one was watching, that sweetness vanished. She watered the plants roughly, splashing water everywhere, as if taking out her anger. She glanced over at me, checking if I was watching, and muttered in annoyance, "When will this be over? If it weren't for that old woman's inheritance, I wouldn't have to keep up this charade." Those words were like another stab to the heart. The inheritance. Why was she suddenly talking about my assets? I stayed motionless, pretending to still be asleep. But in my mind, everything was starting to take shape. That night, I was sitting in the reading room when I smelled roasted garlic coming from the kitchen. Valerie was making dinner, and the house filled with the aroma of the chicken noodle soup she knew I loved. I decided to go get a glass of water, wanting to see if she would let something else slip. The kitchen door was slightly open, and I stopped in the doorway when I heard her voice, loud, talking on the phone. It was a sweet, syrupy voice, completely different from the bitter tone that morning. "Honey, I need to talk to you," she started, in a tender, almost flirting tone. "Mom is so weak right now, and all the paperwork will be a mess later. Why don't you ask her to sign part of the house over to me now? It could be like a gift from her to us." I held my breath and leaned my ear closer to the door. My heart was pounding, about to burst. I heard David's voice on the other end, low and hesitant. "We should leave that for later. Mom is sick. I don't want to bother her." I could picture David's tired face, his serious eyes whenever he had to face an argument. But Valerie didn't stop. Her voice became sharp, irritated. "Later, when am I supposed to keep taking care of her day and night and get nothing? Do you only think about your job, or do you just not want her to give me anything?" David's voice sounded even more exhausted. "It's not that. Fine, I'll come back this weekend and we'll talk to Mom directly." But Valerie didn't back down. "You always say that. All you know how to do is avoid things," she screamed, almost losing control. There was a short silence, and then I heard the beep of the call ending. David had hung up, probably to avoid a bigger fight. Valerie threw her phone onto the kitchen counter. The sharp thud echoed in the silent kitchen. She exhaled in anger and muttered, "Useless." I quickly moved away and walked back to the living room. My heart still pounding, I took a deep breath and calmly walked into the kitchen, pretending I had just arrived. I pointed to the water pitcher, signaling I wanted a glass. Valerie turned around and her expression changed completely. A kind smile appeared instantly, as if nothing had happened. She filled a glass of water and wrote on the whiteboard, "Mom, rest a bit. Dinner is almost ready." I took the glass with a shaky hand, nodded, and smiled back at her. But inside, my heart ached. I understood now. Valerie didn't just want money, she wanted this house. Her greed ran deeper than I ever imagined. At noon the next day, I sat in my usual armchair, with a cup of cold tea in my hand, pretending to be tired. I turned to Valerie and motioned that my head hurt a little and I wanted to go to bed early. She nodded, with her usual soft smile, and wrote on the whiteboard, "Rest, Mom. I'll make you a light lunch later." I smiled back at her and went to my room, closing the door. But I didn't lie down. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped together, trying to stay calm. Half an hour later, I heard the sound of the vacuum cleaner roaring from the living room. That sound, constant and loud, was like a curtain covering everything. And then I heard Valerie's voice, hidden beneath the noise, talking on the phone. She thought the sound of the vacuum was the perfect cover, that no one could hear her. But I heard every word, every syllable, sharp as a blade. I tiptoed out of the room, barefoot, so I wouldn't make a sound. I hid behind the hallway wall, where the light from the living room didn't reach. Valerie was talking to Sarah, her tone full of contempt. "My husband is useless. I asked him for one simple thing and he doesn't even have the guts to do it. Fine, I'll have to handle it myself." I heard the rustling of paper, like she was leafing through a stack of documents. Then her voice sounded triumphant and cold. "I already printed out a full power of attorney. I'll tell her their medical forms, that she has to sign them so I can bring in a specialist from the city." I felt my heart clench, as if an invisible hand was squeezing it, but Valerie didn't stop. She kept talking, with cruel satisfaction. "As soon as she signs this, everything will be mine. This house, the land outside of town, and all the money in her savings account. I already did my research. Sarah, she has more than I thought." Sarah said something on the other end. I couldn't make it out, but Valerie's laugh was clear, sharp and full of arrogance. "Of course, as soon as I have everything. The first thing I'm doing is filing for divorce. I'm so sick of that husband who's always away and barely even looks at me." My whole body went cold, like a bucket of ice water had been dumped on me. I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. My head was spinning. Valerie didn't just want the money. She wanted to steal everything, destroy David, and just walk away. This house, the one Thomas and I built brick by brick, where David grew up laughing. To her, it was just an asset. And David, my son, who loved her with all his heart, was just a burden to her, something she could throw away without a second thought. I went back to my room in silence and gently closed the door. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. The pain in my chest transformed into a flame of determination, burning and impossible to put out. I thought of Thomas, who dedicated his life to building a home for us, who taught me that family is the most valuable thing. I thought of David, of his clear eyes as a child, and his tired voice last night when Valerie was pressuring him. I would not let her destroy my son. I would not let Thomas's legacy fall into the hands of a liar. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts. I didn't call David. I knew I couldn't talk to him yet, that I didn't have enough proof for him to believe me. Instead, I looked for a name I hadn't dialed in a long time. Lucy, my next-door neighbor. Lucy was a widow, like me, but with a sharp mind and a heart you could trust. We had spent hours sitting on the porch, drinking tea and telling each other life stories. She would be my ally. I sent her a short text. "Lucy, are you home? I need your help with something very important." I hit send. My heart was pounding. Just a few minutes later, my phone vibrated. Lucy's message appeared on the screen. "I'm home. Meet me at the back door in 10 minutes." I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to enter a battle. I knew I couldn't face Valerie alone, not when she had planned everything so precisely. But with Lucy's help, I would have a chance. Valerie was in the living room, getting ready for her midday live stream. I could hear her laugh and her peppy voice, completely immersed in her virtual world, not noticing anything around her. It was my chance. I got up carefully. I walked to the back door. My bare feet barely touched the wooden floor so I wouldn't make a sound. The door closed behind me, and I slipped over to Lucy's house, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would escape my chest. Lucy opened the door as soon as I knocked gently. She pulled me inside. Her eyes showed concern, but also determination. "Martha, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice low but firm. I couldn't speak right away. I had a lump in my throat. I took out my phone and started to quickly type the whole story into my notes. How I got my hearing back, Valerie's cruel words, and the plan to take my assets that she had discussed with Sarah. My fingers were shaking as I typed, but I tried to make everything clear, every detail as sharp as the wounds Valerie had left in my heart. When Lucy finished reading, her eyes went wide, shifting from surprise to anger. She put her hand on my shoulder and gave it a firm pat, as if trying to give me strength. "Don't you worry, Martha," she said, her voice clear and decisive. I could hear her perfectly now. "My nephew works with electronics. I'm going to call him." She walked over to a wooden table in her living room, opened a small box, and took out some small devices. "This is a recorder. It looks like a phone charger," she explained, holding up a small black object. "And this other one is disguised as an air freshener. You just plug it in and it records everything." I looked at those tiny devices and felt a spark of hope return. They were my weapon, the way to expose Valerie without confronting her directly. Lucy and I sat down to plan carefully. I would go back first. I would keep pretending to be the deaf, frail mother-in-law. A little later, Lucy would come over with the excuse of bringing me some chicken broth to help me get my strength back. While Valerie was distracted, she would plant the devices in strategic places around the house. "We have to be quick. Martha," Lucy said with a sharp look, "that girl is smarter than you think." I nodded, feeling like I was preparing for a battle I could not lose. Everything went according to plan. I went back home and sat in my armchair, pretending to be tired. Valerie was still on her live stream. Her high-pitched voice was audible, showing a silk dress to her clients. When Lucy knocked on the door, carrying a steaming pot of soup, Valerie quickly ended her stream and ran to open it with a radiant smile. "Lucy, you're right on time. Mom needs to get her strength back," she said, her voice sweet as honey. From the living room, I wrote on my whiteboard, "Thank you, Lucy. Your soup is always delicious." Valerie let out a loud laugh, bragging to Lucy about how well she was taking care of me, as if she wanted to win even more praise. While Valerie and I talked, using the whiteboard, Lucy acted fast. She plugged the charger into an outlet hidden behind the sofa, right where Valerie usually sat to talk on the phone. The air freshener was placed on a shelf in the hallway, near the kitchen door, where she often did her live streams or took calls. Another device was hidden in the kitchen, behind the spice jars that Valerie rarely touched. Lucy did it all with the skill of someone who's done this before. Her eyes met mine, and she gave me a discreet nod, as if to say, "It's done." That afternoon, Valerie came into the living room with a smile as bright as the sun. She was carrying a thick folder and placed it on the table in front of me, looking excited. She wrote on the whiteboard, with elegant handwriting, "Good news. Mom, I contacted a very good doctor in the city. He agreed to come to the house to check on you. This is just the registration form. You just need to sign the confirmation." I took the folder, my heart pounding. I turned the pages, pretending to read carefully, but my eyes soon found the words, "Full power of attorney agreement," printed in bold on the last page. The detailed clauses about the transfer of the house's deed, the land outside of town, and also my bank accounts, were all clearly listed. Valerie hadn't been lying about her plan. She had it all figured out. I pretended to frown, pointing at the complicated legal phrases, acting like I didn't understand. Valerie, getting impatient, wrote on the whiteboard, "It's just a formality, Mom. Sign it quickly so I can send it in on time." Her voice, based on her lip movements, was still sweet, but I saw the rush in her eyes. She wanted me to sign it, now, to get it over with before I suspected anything. I tried to stall for time, turning the pages over and over, my heart churning, but I kept calm. I knew if I signed, I would lose everything. Not just the assets, but the memories of Thomas, the home he and I had built. Just as Valerie was pointing to where I should sign, the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. She frowned, visibly annoyed by the interruption. She signaled to me, "Mom, wait 1 second," and ran off to get a package from the delivery driver. As soon as I was alone in the room, I acted immediately. I took out my phone, activated the silent camera mode. My hands were shaking, but I carefully turned each page of the document and took pictures of everything, especially the last page with the words "Full power of attorney agreement" and the empty space for my signature. With every click, my heart beat faster, like I was stealing a dangerous secret. I had just finished photographing the last page when I heard Valerie's footsteps approaching the door. I quickly locked my phone, put it in my robe pocket, and placed the folder back in its exact spot. Valerie walked into the living room with a small, carefully wrapped box, probably the package that had just been delivered. She set it on the table with a soft click and looked back at the folder still in front of me. Her smile was still radiant, but her eyes held a contained tension. "Mom, please sign, so I can send the document in soon," she wrote on the whiteboard, her strokes more hurried than usual. I cleared my throat and, calmly, I said, "Why are you in such a hurry if I sign it later? Will that cause a problem for you?" The question came out simply, but it was sharp, like an arrow aimed right at Valerie. She froze, her eyes wide. Panic flashed across her face before being replaced by a forced, crooked smile. Valerie wrote quickly on the whiteboard, "Oh, no, not at all. I guess I was just worrying too much. There's no rush. We can do it later." She gathered the folder hastily, clutching it to her chest as if she was afraid I'd take it, and made an excuse to go to the kitchen. I knew right then that her plan had just fallen apart. When Valerie disappeared behind the kitchen door, I sat in silence, my hand still gripping the water glass. My heart was pounding. That night, after Valerie had gone back to her apartment, I sat alone in the silent house. The dim lamplight illuminated the old photos of Thomas and David hanging on the wall. I took out my phone, my fingers sliding across the screen. I didn't call David. Instead, I opened my messages and typed, "Son, this weekend is Valerie's birthday. Will you be able to come? I want to throw her a surprise party, to thank her for taking such good care of me." I hit send. My heart was pounding, but my mind had never been clearer. A few minutes later, David replied, "Of course, Mom. I'll do my best to be there. Don't worry about a thing." Leave it to me." I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. I texted back, "No, I want to prepare it myself. Just make sure you get here on time." I put the phone down, feeling like I had just set a trap and was just waiting for the prey to walk in. The next day, while Valerie was out shopping, I carefully collected all the recorders Lucy had planted. I moved quietly, checking every corner of the house to make sure I didn't leave any devices behind. The charger from behind the sofa, the air freshener from the bookshelf, and the other device from the kitchen. They were all well hidden. No one would ever suspect. I took them to my room, locked the door, and sat down at my computer, putting on my headphones. I listened carefully to every fragment of the recordings, every one of Valerie's words like a knife in my chest. I filtered out the background noise and saved only the most poisonous phrases. The part where she complained to Sarah about me, calling me an old woman who doesn't know anything. The part where she pressured David to sign over the assets. And most importantly, the part where she bragged about her plan to take everything and then divorce David. Every word was a wound. But I didn't allow myself to be weak. I edited it all into a single, crystal-clear audio file. After that, I opened the photos I had taken of the power of attorney file I had secretly saved. I created a simple slideshow showing each page of the document with its cold, legal words. Full power of attorney, transfer of real estate property and bank accounts. I arranged them carefully so that, when I played it, everyone could clearly see Valerie's plan. I checked every detail, from the sound to the images. Everything was ready for the birthday party. The morning of Valerie's birthday, I woke up before the sun came up. I went out to the garden with a pair of pruning shears. I carefully cut the most beautiful red roses. These were the same flowers that, I remembered clearly, Valerie had watered so roughly, as if they meant nothing to her. I arranged them in an old porcelain vase, placed it in the center of the table, and told myself that this would be the day I got justice for my family. I told Valerie I wanted to go into the kitchen to prepare some dishes to thank her. "Mom, are you recovered enough to do that?" she wrote on the whiteboard, her eyes shining with excitement. She took a picture of me by the stove, holding a wooden spoon, and posted it on her social media with the caption, "Mom is recovered and is even cooking for her own birthday party. Such happiness. I smiled when I saw it. But deep down, I knew that photo was just part of the show she had created. Valerie had no idea that I had prepared a much bigger surprise, not to thank her, but to expose her. She excitedly called her friends, including Sarah, her accomplice in those poisonous words. "Don't forget to be on time," she said cheerfully on the phone. I heard her, and I knew she didn't just want to surprise David. She wanted to show off her perfect life. She wanted everyone to see her as the ideal wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. In the afternoon, David arrived home. I heard the sound of his car pulling up out front. When he came in, I noticed he was thinner, his face tired from a long work trip, but his eyes were shining with joy when he saw me. "Mom, you look so much better," he said, hugging me tightly. In his hands, he was holding a large bouquet of fragrant lilies and a red velvet box. I smiled. I patted him on the shoulder, but my heart was heavy. David had no idea that the gift he had prepared for his wife would soon be overshadowed by the painful truth I was about to reveal. The party started as the sun was setting, the house filled with music, laughter, and conversation. Valerie was the center of attention, wearing an emerald green silk dress, receiving compliments, smiling like a queen. I sat silently in the corner, watching her. When everyone sat down at the table, David stood up and opened the velvet box. Inside was a necklace with a sapphire pendant that sparkled under the lights. "Valerie, I chose this because it matches you," he said warmly. Valerie hugged him and answered sweetly, "Thank you. I love you so much." She shot me a quick glance, a triumphant look, as if she wanted to show me she still had everything under control. I lowered my head and pretended to take a sip of water, but I knew my moment was about to arrive. After dinner, it was time for gifts. The guests came up one by one to give Valerie their carefully wrapped presents: a silk scarf, perfume, a small handbag. She received them all smiling, thanking them nonstop. Finally, all eyes turned to me. Valerie looked at me, her smile wavering for just a second, as if trying to guess what I would do. I stood up slowly, with no gift box in my hands, only the TV remote. I smiled at her, a smile I knew she had never seen before, cold, sharp, and full of intention. "Valerie," I said, my voice firm, causing the entire room to fall silent. "I don't have a physical gift. I have something more special for you, to thank you for everything you've done." I pointed the remote at the large television screen in the living room and pressed play. The screen stayed dark, but a familiar voice started to play through the speakers, clear and crisp, cutting through the silence. "If it weren't for this house and that old woman's money, I would have been long gone." It was Valerie's voice, cold and full of contempt. Then the voice continued, mocking and cruel. "As soon as she signs, everything will be mine. The house, the land, the accounts. Then I'll file for divorce. Seriously, David is terrible. He can't even last 2 minutes." The room went silent. Valerie's smile froze. Her face turned white as a sheet. David, stunned, looked at his wife with eyes full of confusion. Sarah lowered her head, gripping the edge of the table, her face pale. At that moment, the TV screen lit up, showing the first image, the cover page of a contract titled "Full Power of Attorney Agreement." The next pages appeared one by one, revealing every single clause about the transfer of assets, all perfectly clear. I turned off the sound, picked up the microphone, and my voice, now firm and steady, rang out. "Today, I had planned to announce a large business fund I was gifting you, so you could open that fashion boutique you always dreamed of." I looked directly into Valerie's eyes. I saw her flinch, her lips pressed tight. "But instead of giving you money, I'm giving you a lesson. Greed and lies will never buy you happiness or respect." Valerie stood frozen, her lips trembling, unable to say a word. The guests started to whisper. Their looks of admiration turned to contempt and disappointment. David stood up slowly, without looking at Valerie. His gaze was fixed on the TV screen, and then it turned to me, his eyes filled with pain and disillusionment. The birthday party ended in a suffocating silence. The guests left one by one, with hurried steps and averted eyes. No one said a word to Valerie. Sarah was the first to leave, practically running, her heels clicking rapidly on the wooden floor. I just stood in the corner, the remote clutched in my hand, my heart heavy, but at the same time, relieved. When the house was empty except for the three of us. David turned to Valerie. He just stood there, his shoulders slightly slumped, but with a cold look I had never seen before. "Give me the keys to the apartment," he said, his voice hoarse, without a trace of emotion. Valerie burst into tears streaming down her cheeks, but I knew they weren't tears of regret. She grabbed his hand, her voice trembling. "Honey, let me explain. I didn't mean it. David pulled his hand away firmly, though his face was full of pain. "There's nothing to explain," he answered, his voice icy. "I heard it all, and I saw it all." Valerie froze, her lips tight, her face pale. She knew it was over, shaking. She took the keychain from her purse and dropped it on the table with a sharp click. She didn't dare look at me. She just went upstairs in silence and started packing her things into a small suitcase. The sound of the zipper breaking the silence was like a final punctuation mark. Without a word of goodbye, she left into the night, her silhouette disappearing through the front gate. A week later, David filed for divorce. The process was fast, as Valerie didn't make any claims. Maybe she knew she didn't stand a chance. David sold the old apartment, that place full of false memories, and moved back in with me at the family home. For the first few days, he barely spoke. He threw himself into his work, spending hours in front of the computer, as if the routine could erase the wound. I didn't push him or ask him questions. I just cooked his favorite meals and made him a cup of chamomile tea every night. I knew that time would heal. But first, David needed space to face what had happened. Little by little, David started to open up more. He didn't travel as much for work and spent more time at home. On the weekends, we would go out to the garden together, pulling weeds, pruning the rose bushes, and planting some small succulents he wanted to try. "Mom, I remember when you used to teach me how to prune the plants," he said one time, holding the shears with a slight smile. I looked at him, feeling a warmth in my chest. Even though Valerie had left a scar on his heart, I knew my son was still in there. The same boy who smiled from ear to ear when he finally learned to ride his bike in this very yard. Valerie had left town. No one knew where she went. And her social media accounts were completely deleted, as if she wanted to erase every trace of her existence. Sometimes I'd hear the neighbors mention her, but only in vague whispers, without details. I didn't care. To me, Valerie had become the past, an expensive lesson about trust and betrayal. I just wanted David to be able to find happiness again. I went back to my quiet life. Every morning, I went out to the garden to water the flowers, taking care of the roses that Thomas loved so much. In the afternoons, I'd sit on the porch and read, with the sunlight shining on the pages. Sometimes, Lucy would bring over a tray of freshly baked cookies, and we would drink tea while looking out at the blooming garden. "You did the right thing, Martha," Lucy would say, her eyes full of pride. "You protected your family." I smiled and took a sip of tea. "Thank you," said Lucy. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what I would have done." One evening, as the sun was setting, David sat down next to me on the garden bench. He looked at me with a spark in his eye. "Mom, I want to stay here with you," he said. "I want us to rebuild everything together." just like before. I nodded, and tears rolled silently down my cheeks. They weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief and hope. This house, this garden, they had witnessed my happy days with Thomas, and now they would be the place where David and I would start over. I looked at the roses, still blooming despite the storm. I squeezed David's hand. I felt his strength, and I knew that no matter how many more storms came our way, we would face them together. After everything I went through, I understood something profound. Kindness should not be given to the wrong person, and trust should not be placed in the wrong hands. Some smiles look sincere, but they hide greed and lies. If I hadn't been paying attention, everything Thomas left behind would have ended up in the hands of someone who didn't deserve it. The lesson I want to share is this: love, but not blindly. Trust, but watch and listen with your heart. Compassion is valuable, but sometimes, to protect what is most sacred, we must learn to be strong and cold at the right moment. Because true justice isn't just about punishing the betrayer, it's about preserving the dignity and peace of those who truly deserve it. The story you just heard has had names and locations changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hopes that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes, I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to confront it all to get your voice back? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the path for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I will leave 2 of the most beloved stories from the Elderly Stories channel. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.